Next Chapter Podcasts.
Hey, Sal.
Hank, what's going on? We haven't worked a case in years.
I just bought my car at Carvana, and it was so easy. Too easy.
Think something's up?
You tell me. They got thousands of options. Found a great car at a great price. And it got delivered the next day.
It sounds like Carvana just makes it easy to buy your car, Hank.
Yeah, you're right. Case closed.
Buy your car today on
Carvana.
Delivery fees may apply.
The world is growing more complicated by the day, but too often, everyone seems to be operating on the same old assumptions about global affairs. But if you're not sure that world domination by the United States is the right path for America or the world, or if you've got questions about conventional geopolitical thinking, you should check out American Prestige, a foreign policy podcast from a different perspective. Every week on American Prestige, historian and former Bernie Sanders foreign policy advisor Daniel Bessner, that's me, and my co-host, the journalist Derek Davison, analyze U.S. foreign policy from a critical framework that sheds light on myriad topics related to international affairs. So, if you're curious to know what U.S. foreign policy would look like if the interests of all people in the world, and not only rich Americans, were taken into account, then check out American Prestige at AmericanPrestigePod.com. That's AmericanPrestigePod.com. And you could, of course, also find us on your favorite podcast app.
So the growth of immigration is really a driving force in the success that we have. And I think it just adds to the vibrancy of the city.
So it starts with a concerted effort to dream something big, to say that, hey, we want to be a sports town.
Whether it was Charlotte, whether it was Jacksonville, Memphis, Nashville, I think they were more focused on getting a particular team to be an amenity that demonstrated the city was worthy of major status.
You know what I'm saying? It's like we got a demo tape and nobody want to hear it, but it's like this, the South got something to say.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Our New South, a podcast series presented by the Levine Museum of the New South in Charlotte, North Carolina, with the generous support from the Knight Foundation. My name is Kevin Blackistone, coming to you from College Park, Maryland, and I'm joined by my co-host, Dr. Robert Green, a professor of history at Claflin University. And we truly thank you for tuning in today. Over the course of this series, we'll be discussing the concept of the New South and how it's evolved with academics, activists, and creatives. We'll investigate the South, asking questions of our expert guests in key areas like socioeconomic mobility, voting rights, and discriminatory practices that have shaped the South over the decades leading up to today's challenges.
We thank you for joining us on this journey and ask that you please tell your friends and family about us. Follow the show, rate and review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your pods. Okay, let's get to today's episode of the show.
South got something to say.
In today's episode of Our New South, we will discuss the rapid evolution of southern cities into major U.S. economic centers in recent years, due to the increase in businesses moving their operations to the South, and how the great new migration of African Americans and immigrants moving to the South has also impacted the region's social and economic landscape. We will also discuss how the development of professional sports culture in the South has greatly enhanced the global image of many southern cities, and whether these new southern boom towns are actually open for business to all of its residents. But before we get to our guests, I would like to ask Dr. Robert Green to provide us with a brief history lesson on the economics of the South and its impact on native Southerners in recent decades. And when I think about the economy of the South, of course, the first thing, Robert, that jumps to mind is the plantation economy and the importance of cotton and enslaved African labor. But that was labor that was imported against its will. And now, in talking with our guests, we're really talking about the development of a new economy that has been grown heavily by immigrants who have chosen to come to the South.
In many ways, this New South of the 21st century was the dream of the New South visionaries of the late 19th century. A South that got away from its roots as a plantation-based economic system, as an agricultural-based economic system, and went into heavy industry, finance, capital, and the like. I think for a lot of folks, though, the question becomes, as the South's industries and businesses change dramatically, what will that mean for the South itself? What will our identity look like in the years and decades to come? I'm certainly excited to find out. The contemporary version of a New South era has its origins in the mid-1960s. Of course, this means it has much to owe to the civil rights movement. The expansion of civil and human rights for Black Americans fundamentally altered the South. However, perhaps no group understood this quicker than the businessmen of both the region and the entire nation. The city of Atlanta, which long proclaimed itself as the city too busy to hate, focusing instead on business growth and economic expansion, was poised to lead this version of the New South economically, just as it was in the 1880s and 1890s. This time, however, business would take a different and very 20th century form, and ultimately, business often pushed government along in desegregation, not the other way around. Atlanta's businessmen were among those who pushed for a National Football League franchise there, and it was announced in June 1965. Atlanta made the most logical sense for the first NFL franchise in the Deep South. The city's leadership, Black and white, saw the franchise as announcing the city's official promotion to so-called big city status. Businesses such as Coca-Cola, meanwhile, had already made themselves into international powerhouses. 3 decades later, this synergy of business and athletic interests, along with government, pushed Atlanta into even more rarefied air as a host city of the Summer Olympic Games in 1996. But don't forget, this journey began in 1965, when, in the pages of the Atlanta Constitution, newspapers' writers crowed, quote, "Once again, Atlanta is in the delightful position of flexing its muscles and declaring to the world, I'm Major League," end quote. Many southern cities developed economically as part of a national and global system of commerce, trade, and financial transaction. The growth of Charleston in the 18th century was the result of its centrality to the Atlantic slave trade. Atlanta's growth in the late 19th century as the first iteration of a New South city was linked to the growth of industry in that city, along with Birmingham, Alabama. Cities such as New Orleans, Mobile, and Memphis depended on trade along the Mississippi River. And Charlotte, in the 20th century, made a name for itself as a financial capital of the U.S. South. But Charlotte also aspired to Major League status as a city, obtaining it via the creation of the Charlotte Hornets in the NBA and the Carolina Panthers in the NFL. Hosting a 1994 NCAA Final Four also enhanced the city's credibility as both a sports town and as a center of the current New South. As cities across the South prepare to open their doors, stadiums, and wallets for the 2024 Copa America tournament and the 2026 FIFA World Cup, we can see that the New South of the 21st century is showcasing itself as open for business to everyone all over the world. A message, by the way, that would have been familiar to Henry Grady and the New South backers in the 1880s, or Atlanta City Fathers in the 1960s. The difference now is that the South is also opening itself to business regardless of race, creed, or nationality.
Our first guest today on Our New South is Omar George, chairman of the Aurora Grocery Group and owner of 4 Compare Foods grocery stores in Charlotte, North Carolina. Compare Foods is a chain of grocery stores across the East Coast that caters specifically to the needs of immigrants from Latin America and other countries who are looking for products from their traditional homelands. A native of Queens, New York, Omar is an attorney, a second-generation grocer, and serves on the boards of the Carolina Food Industry Council and the North Carolina Retail Merchants Association. Our New South welcomes Omar George. Well, Omar, thanks for doing this again. As we get started, can you introduce yourself to our audience, where you are from and where you are now and what you do?
Thank you for inviting me, Kevin and Robert. So my name is Omar George Peña. I am the CEO of Compare Food Supermarkets in Charlotte, North Carolina, and the chairman of Aurora Grocery Group, which is kind of the umbrella company that oversees Compare Foods, Gala Foods, and Gala Fresh supermarkets and we have 37 supermarkets from Massachusetts down to North Carolina. I am based in Charlotte, North Carolina, and I've been here since 2009 when I moved down with my wife and my twin boys. And glad to be more of a Charlottean than a New Yorker at this point.
But you are a New Yorker, and now you're in North Carolina. And if I understand it, you did have some relatives there, correct?
When I moved down from New York back in 2009, right. Yes. So my first relative moved down to the Raleigh area in 2004. And then he kind of started recruiting some of us to come down. My family's been in the supermarket business since the 1970s. And it's a very big family. On my mother's side of the family, there's 15 siblings. So I've got about almost 70 cousins. And all of us are in the supermarket industry in one way or another, whether it's operating them or as a vendor or in some shape or fashion. And, when my uncle came down in 2004, he opened up a store right outside of Raleigh in Zebulon. And he started saying, hey, guys, this is beautiful down here. You guys don't know what you're missing. You've got to get out of New York and come follow me. And some of his siblings, my aunts and uncles, 2 or 3 of them came down. And then some of my cousins came. And eventually in 2009, I was convinced to come down to Charlotte and take over the operations here in the stores that we were building in this market.
And why Charlotte, given that until recently, we would not have thought of Charlotte as being a location or a destination for immigrants, number one, but in your case, for Latinos?
Well, I think that had been changing. And one of the interesting things after I arrived to Charlotte, and I started getting more involved in the civic organizations and the leadership groups around the city, I realized the immigrants have always been here. We've just kind of been quiet. We haven't really been out there as upfront and in your face about our presence, but our impact is felt throughout the city. Every time you look at the beautiful skyline that we have in uptown Charlotte, that was paid for the banks, but it was built by us, by the immigrants, right? And still today, when you go by any construction site and you hear the music playing on the radios, it's going to be generally Spanish music, right? So we've been here through the growth of the city. I actually say that we're in a large way responsible for the growth of the city because of how quickly it came up. And I just think that we've never been as vocal about it, or we've never taken the credit for it, because that's not in our culture. Our culture is work hard, keep your head down, and create a good life for your family and make sure that your kids grow up in a better circumstance than you did. And to us, that's really the definition of the American dream. And there's plenty of people that are moving to Charlotte to take advantage of that opportunity here. So that's part of the reason why we've grown, because those opportunities are more easily available here than maybe they have been in the past in the Northeast or in the Midwest or in other parts of the country. But I think that we've always been here. We've just been kind of quiet about it. And now, as we're getting some critical mass numbers, is when we're becoming more visible to the community at large.
And I think, Omar, that's a really important point about how you become sort of a community touchstone for so many people in Charlotte and elsewhere in North Carolina. And I really want to drill a bit deeper into your actual business and how you've been able to be so successful in Charlotte. So could you talk a bit about, in particular, what the experience is like for customers coming to your stores? Because you've been very explicit and quite clear about how you want folks to not only just buy food at your stores, but to actually enjoy the experience of being there. So what do you think customers will get out of going to your grocery stores in Charlotte?
In North Carolina, what I realized was we have to really define what our mission is. Our mission is not just to be the closest supermarket in the most densely packed area. What is it that really differentiates us? Because North Carolina was much more brand focused than New York would be. In New York, you don't care what the name of your local grocery store is. You just go to the one down the block, right? In North Carolina, if you're a Harris Teeter customer, you're going to pass Walmart and you're going to pass Food Lion and you're going to pass, Buy Low when it existed, and you're going to go to Harris Teeter, right? And if you're a Publix customer. If you came up from Miami and you've always shopped at Publix, you're going to skip Harris Teeter and you're going to skip the Fresh Market and you're going to Publix. So I had to really focus on how do we identify who is the Compare Foods customer and why do they enjoy shopping in our store. And that's where that deep dive into the experience comes from. So we have, number one, the immigrant community, the international community, that they're only going to find the products from their homeland in our country, right? And again, that came from an actual experience in the supermarket where we had a gentleman from Ecuador come in and comment, "Oh my God, I haven't seen this brand of tuna fish since I left Ecuador 20 years ago," right? And he saw it in our store for the first time in 20 years. And this brought back this emotional connection back to his country. And that was kind of the first little light bulb. Oh, this is what makes us different. That's a super important part of our diet, of our family, how we have dinner every single night. The meal is prepared every single day, every single night to have dinner as a family, right? So making sure that our produce and our meat departments and our perishables really are at the top quality that we can have. Also, again, adding that variety, right? So if you're from the Caribbean and you're used to plantains in your diet, for a long time, we were the only place that you could get a plantain in Charlotte, right? So having that variety, having that freshness, and really tapping into that. And the more authentic we were to that mission, what we realized, the more attractive we became to a broader audience. So now we have African American customers and white customers and Asian customers. I just spent a week in Punta Cana, Dominican Republic, and there was this weird dish that I loved. Let me go find the ingredients at Compare Foods. So, and that's where that cultural interconnectedness comes in, that really becomes a real beautiful meld of community. When we start going back and forth and saying, "Oh, I want to try I'm not Venezuelan, but I want to try an arepa," or "I'm not Salvadorian, but I want to try a pupusa," right? Because I saw it on the Food Network, or my daughter-in-law is from El Salvador, or whatever that little connection is, and they know they can come to our store and get that authentic ingredient to make the dish that they're looking to have for their family. We really rely on first, second generation immigrants to really make up the bulk of our customer base, because they're the ones that really want that connection back to their home country. They're in this new country where they really probably don't know the language as well as they want to. They don't feel as comfortable asking for help in a traditional American grocery store. When they go to our store, they can speak in Spanish. They can ask for help in Spanish. They can find their brands. So that sense of familiarity and comfort is very important for our customers to feel. So the growth of immigration is really a driving force in the success that we have. And I think it just adds to the vibrancy of the city.
Now, you mentioned there a comfort level that you see your stores providing to Spanish-speaking communities, to the immigrant community. But I also noted that you told the Charlotte Business Journal a couple of months ago, when you were asked about the immigrant experience in Charlotte, that you also were cognizant of an anti-immigrant feeling in and around Charlotte, and still having to deal with that, and also how that kind of bled into or bleeds into your business associations. So I'm curious as to what those challenges are that you've kind of faced, and how you've decided to kind of circumvent them or bring them down.
I don't think it's a Charlotte issue. I think that it's an issue bigger than the city of Charlotte. It's a statewide issue. It's a North Carolina issue. And I think that really comes from the urban-rural divide that we have in the state, right? We have a very, very powerful state legislature in Raleigh, and that's becoming more powerful every single day. And unfortunately, I don't think that they are not big fans of immigrants, right? The party that's in power right now in Raleigh, but it's not specifically anti-immigrant. It almost feels like they're almost anti-city, right? So very often And you can look back to HB2 with that community. In our case, removing in-state tuition for undocumented students. How are you helping the state by having less educated residents that live in it, right? So things like that, where there's decisions that are made to gain political points that will end up hurting the state in the long run, right? Just to get, a small bump in your next election because you're from a rural district, and that is what your constituents in that district want to see. So I want to be very clear. I think that the city of Charlotte is incredibly welcoming. And I think that they do a great job in making sure that there's lots of programs and outreach and feeling like immigrants are accepted into the community and the city, right? But when you look at the state, there's this general almost disdain for cities, right? And sometimes they pick them out. They say, look, Charlotte and Raleigh and Greensboro and Winston-Salem and Asheville, we're going to pass laws specifically to hurt you because that's what our constituents in the rural towns want to see, and it gets us political points. And as immigrants, we get caught up in that, the same way that the African-American community might, the same way that the LGBT community might, the same way that women might, right? So those are things that all of us are facing, I think, and we need to be more vocal about it and more intentional about how we're going to try and address those issues, because it's going to be very difficult to break through and change that.
As someone who's not from the South, but someone who's adopted the South as your home, first, what does the term the South mean to you? And secondly, what does the term the New South mean to you? And are those things, are those ideas different in your own mind?
Well, as a New Yorker, the South was anything below Pennsylvania, right? So, and, I grew up thinking that the North was anything north of Westchester, right? So it's, New York is this much of the country and everything else is this, right? Until you leave New York and you realize that there's this whole other beautiful country out there that you need to also experience. The South, to me, I've always loved, again, being in food, right? Being involved in food retail. I've always loved the cuisine of the South. To me, that culture of Sunday dinner and soul food and ribs and pulled pork barbecue. I go back to food. Food is such an important part of culture for me. That's really what I thought of on the South. And I thought, well, I'm moving to Charlotte. I'm going to have some amazing barbecue. And then I found out I have to go about an hour and a half away to find it in Lexington or somewhere else. Until now, there's a couple of really good ones here. But when I first got here, they hadn't opened yet. But that cultural aspect I've always really found very attractive. Very, there's that same sense of culture and family that we have in the Latin American community. So I always felt a connection with that aspect. And the New South is living in Charlotte. You see it every day, right? And if you go to Nashville, if you go to Atlanta, if you go to Columbia, Charleston is kind of nice old South, right? But yes. But you go around to these different cities and you see the growth and you see the this kind of metamorphosis that's happening, right? And it's really a beautiful thing that's arising out of that, where it's respectful to the history and the traditions, but it's still modernized and improved and really attractive to anyone who wants to live here. But it's really an honor for me to have been invited to come here and sharing this conversation with both of you, Robert and Kevin, and thank you for the questions, and thank you for the work that you're doing with the museum and getting these stories out there.
No, it's tremendous. Thank you for taking the time. Our next guest is Keith Cockrell, the president of Bank of America Charlotte, where he leads the company in connecting the bank's resources with people and companies across the region, as well as addressing social and economic concerns to help build stronger communities in the Charlotte area. In addition to his role as president, Keith also holds the title of head of sports sponsorships at Bank of America, an important role given Bank of America's significant investment in the Charlotte sports scene, including sponsorships of the Carolina Panthers, the Charlotte Hornets, NASCAR, and Bank of America Stadium. A native New Yorker, Keith has lived in Charlotte for more than 20 years and has been honored in Charlotte for his work in philanthropy as well as his support of community organizations, including the Levine Museum of the New South, the presenter of this podcast series. Our New South welcomes Keith Cockrell. Well, Keith, thanks so much for doing this with us. We've been looking forward to chatting with you about a number of things, Charlotte and South. But first of all, if you could introduce yourself to our audience, where you're from, and what that journey was that got you to Charlotte.
Well, thank you, Kevin. It's a pleasure to be with you. I'm Keith Cockrell, and currently I'm president of Bank of America Charlotte, here in Charlotte, North Carolina. Originally from New York, Long Island specifically, Huntington, Long Island, and didn't venture very far from home. Went to Columbia University. And although President Obama was my classmate at Columbia, my most important classmate is my wife. So I met my wife at Columbia, and we've been married a long time and blessed to have 3 wonderful children. And so it's been a great ride.
And how did you wind up in the South from New York and staying so close to home, even going to school there?
I was very, very blessed. I was an engineer coming up, as my wife was, and that's where we met at Columbia Engineering. I also played football while I was at Columbia and was fortunate enough back in those days, this is the early 80s, minority engineers was really a thing, and had the pleasure of interning with the IBM Corporation. So I actually joined the IBM company in the Midwest. So Detroit was my first destination. And eventually, Serena and I got reconnected and decided to get married. And her career was going well with HP. And as I mentioned, she was a year ahead of me. So she had a little bit further down the path, so to speak, at the time. And so I made the first move when we got married, and I relocated with the IBM company to the Bay Area. And when I made that move, Bank of America became my client. So that was actually my introduction to Bank of America. They were my client, and just was somewhat fortuitous, and it gave me the opportunity to get some exposure to senior leaders. And ultimately, the project went well. They were interested in me coming on and joining Bank of America. It took them a few attempts to convince me to leave my IBM career, but eventually they did. And here I am 30 years later, still with Bank of America and loving every minute of it.
Thank you so much for that, Mr. Keith Cockrell. This is Robert Green, again, coming to you from Columbia, South Carolina, just down the road. And first off, I want to say that it's quite clear to me that you're not only an intelligent, but a very wise man by saying that the most important classmate you met was your wife. So you are indeed quite wise. But I want to get a bit into what you've seen on the ground in Charlotte in these last 25 years. Of course, now as President of Bank of America in Charlotte, what would you say are some of the reasons that Charlotte has grown so much over those last 25 years? You mentioned the openness and embracing folks coming in from the outside, but what are some other factors you've seen that have really explained Charlotte's tremendous and sustained growth?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I guess my first response would be that it's beyond the wonderful weather that we have here. I think some of us in this community refer to it as our secret sauce, what makes this so special. And you may have some variety in response from leaders or folks that are here, but I'll take a crack at it from my perspective. And I think some of that secret sauce is really relationships. This is a relationship town. People are very, very embracing. So it's beyond being kind. We take great pride in leaning in on our challenges or opportunities. And for me, I don't think there's really a greater joy professionally than working on really tough issues or challenges growth is wonderful, but it presents new opportunities and new challenges as well. To be a great community, you have to have the arts, sports, transportation, news. So those became real pillars for us. Again, when I came 25 years ago, it may have been a struggle to find really great, diverse food. What did we go out and do? We convinced the Culinary Arts School to relocate to Charlotte. It's right down the street. And so we don't have that challenge now. We didn't have a vibrant center city core. Our basketball arena, the Hornets were hot when I came here. You know, we had Muggsy and Lonzo and Larry Johnson. It was the place to be. But the arena was out by the airport. You guys travel a lot. There generally ain't a lot happening around airports from an entertainment perspective. So we moved the arena to Center City. And so that could give our restaurants life, the ability to be sustainable because, hey, people would have dinner, before a game, and they could sustain themselves. I think what we've done an effective job of here in Charlotte, and trust me, there's plenty of work that we still have in front of us, but it could be something as simple as saying that, hey, how can we solve this problem? And that willingness to listen and then collaborate amongst each other. In every city that I've ever lived in talks about public-private partnerships, but I'm going to tell you, I've never experienced anything like this city. The working collaboration between elected officials who just have a commitment and passion to serve, working in conjunction with private industry. And we have multiple examples of that with our school system. We might say that, again, growth can present challenges. One is that you outstrip your growth. We don't have to go very far to see what we don't want to be. Traffic, transportation, quality of life, education. We don't have to go very, very far to say, okay, what can we learn about that? And that's part of what the New South is appreciating, in my opinion, what history has told us and taught us. I'm not trying to browbeat anybody about the history, but I clearly believe that if we understand the history, then it can inform a better future. And I've participated in the arts here, and one particular museum specifically was created with that concept in mind that, we're not trying to ignore, celebrate the Civil War, but can we study the South from the perspective post-Civil War, truly understand it. We too had lynchings here in Charlotte, Mecklenburg County. We too have had unfortunate police violence and things of that nature. And we've had some controversial exhibits, but we created an environment where we can have dialogue. And I think that's something that I'd love to see more in our country, in this world, quite frankly. We have so much diversity that's coming in, immigrants that are coming to Charlotte, finding their home. So much has changed in the 25 years that I've been here. But I think one of the things that distinguishes us is our willingness to have dialogue, to understand, and so many like-minded people who want to create a better opportunity for all.
Certainly, Charlotte has used sports as a front porch for investment into their community. So could you talk a bit about your role with sports in Charlotte and how sports in the Queen City has really helped it to also grow and elevate as a community over the last 30 years?
Well, in short, it's been a team sport. We have a Charlotte Sports Foundation. Virtually every senior leader in the business community is on that board because we recognize the importance of sports. We all know the benefits. It creates energy, excitement. Typically, if you're going to be a sports town, you got to have transportation. So we couldn't have done this and recruited, the Panthers when they came, or the Hornets or get the Hornets back when they left if we didn't have a strong airport.
Right. Yeah.
And now we're the second largest hub for American. So it starts with a concerted effort to dream something big, to say that, hey, we want to be a sports town. So it started with that.
Well, along those lines, as Robert's pointing out, and you well know, about sports being the front porch of a city, and in this case, inviting the world to Charlotte. We had an interview with previously with someone who works in Charlotte, and they pointed to the NCAA Final Four being there as a huge moment for Charlotte. And so I'm also thinking about 2016 when the kerfuffle over the bathroom bill happened, and Charlotte gets on the map for losing the NBA All-Star game. And I'm just wondering about what was the impact then of sports on the community, or do you look more at how the community, maybe even the politics, may have played out, so that now that's no longer particularly an issue?
Well, I hope we'll never repeat those mistakes. And I think it was a mistake. I understand that we talked earlier that, we're in the South, can be conservative. Charlotte, is maybe a blue city surrounded by purple in a red state, some might say. The business community had to come forward, and we did come forward to work with elected officials to truly help them understand the impact of that decision, the economic impact. It wasn't just that we lost the All-Star game. Most of the entertainers were pulling out. We were losing concerts. What I'm proud of is that Charlotte has hosted not only the Democratic National Conference, has also supported the Republican National Conference. Business leaders, I like to believe that color is blind, but we know that's not true. But one thing that business leaders do understand is the color of money. So green matters to people. And we had, I think the business community and Charlotte had to help create the avenue for dialogue to say what the impact we were experiencing and what that impact meant, not only to Charlotte, but to really the state.
And just as a quick follow-up, you mentioned a few minutes ago how important it was to you and it's the citizens of Charlotte that the teams are all playing downtown. Why is that so important? Because I think, as many of our listeners know, a lot of cities now will have their teams play in the suburbs or in the outskirts of town. It creates a different economic dynamic. So tell us a bit about why it's so important to you that the teams do actually stay downtown in Charlotte.
Yeah, I'm excited about it for several reasons. Charlotte is a relatively new city. And so as it was developing, new homes, you could have a 20-minute commute. You could have a 30-minute commute, live in a brand new neighborhood, brand new homes. And because I almost say Charlotte was like when I came 25 years ago, it kind of reminded me of Dallas. People worked here. They didn't live here, and they didn't do any entertainment here. After 5 o'clock, they were gone north up to the lake or south to the lake or in some of the southern, little suburbs. So we had to create some vibrancy. And that's what it gave us, is that now people had a reason to stay inside what we call the loop, because there's a basketball game. There's only, football, that's Sunday, right? Basketball, okay, they can give you 41 games and maybe a few monster pulls and things of that nature. But now we have situations where, oh my goodness, if you had questioned how large the Hispanic Latino community is in Charlotte, all you have to do is come to an MLS game. It's a takeover uptown. We call our downtown uptown here. It's a takeover because it's a wonderful thing. And I think it's made our environment so much richer. And because you have that attraction, and it's critically important today. Maybe I might say, if not as important, maybe slightly more important, because as we've coming out of the pandemic, return to work in office facilities.
Interesting. Thank you.
Thanks so much. It was a pleasure.
Thank you. Our final guest on this episode today is Clayton Trutor, an author and sports historian who presently teaches history at Norwich University in Northfield, Vermont. Clayton is the author of the highly acclaimed book Loserville, How Professional Sports Remade Atlanta, a book that provides a detailed analysis of how the city of Atlanta became the first major southern city to bring professional sports culture to the South in the 1960s. Clayton has written extensively about the history of sports in Boston and the Northeast, is a contributor to the sports publication SB Nation, and presently serves as the state chairman of the Society of American Baseball Researchers Vermont chapter. Our New South welcomes Clayton Trutor.
All right. So this is going to be our 3-hour episode, which should be fun. But yeah, I'm Kevin Blackstone coming to you from College Park, Maryland. And so please share with our listeners, Clayton, where you're originally from, where you've been, and where you're at now.
My name is Clayton Trutor. I grew up in Vermont. I went to the University of Vermont as an undergraduate, where I got a degree in history and political science. I bounced around for a couple of years and ended up in graduate school at Boston College, where I got a PhD in history. I've taught at BC. I taught at Northeastern for a couple of years. I am now teaching at Norwich University in Vermont, which is a small military college in Northfield in the central part of the state. I work as a freelance writer for a lot of different venues, and I write books. This book I'm going to be talking about primarily, Loserville, was my first book on Atlanta's pursuit of pro sports in the 1960s, 1970s, among other things.
Wow. So a real catamount.
A real catamount, indeed. I guess from Western Carolina, they're catamounts too, but...
Exactly. You're the original catamounts. So you wind up writing a book, Loserville, about the history of sports in the South. What drew you to that topic?
I initially, when I was working on a topic for my doctoral dissertation, my areas of interest and expertise are in U.S. urban history and U.S. cultural history. And I thought a sport-related topic would bring that together, that sports would serve as a prism through which to look at other aspects of society and politics and economics, among other things. And I got the idea of writing about the history of pro sports franchise relocations and league expansions. And I brought my proposal to my advisor, and she said, that's a great topic, but it will take you 50 years. Pick a particular city to focus in on that's emblematic of the shifts you want to discuss and consider and analyze. And initially I had 4 cities. I had thought about Phoenix, I thought about Atlanta, I thought about St. Louis, and I thought about Cleveland. My cities, Phoenix and Atlanta, were cities that were pursuing pro sports. Cleveland and St. Louis, more traditional sporting cities trying to defend the franchises they had, was what I was thinking. I just ended up rolling with Atlanta because it seemed like the I guess, veritable theme fest among the different cities. Atlanta is really the first city to go out and try to pursue franchises as opposed to just trying to get one particular franchise. Atlanta in the 1960s went out and tried to get teams in all 4 of the major professional sports. They had a mayor and a city government and leadership in the corporate realm that was very focused on the idea of becoming a big league city too, both for issues of civic prestige, and also they saw it as this kind of axis to build the city around all of its disparate parts. And Atlanta goes out and builds Atlanta Fulton County Stadium with property tax money, and then a little bit better finance, build the Omni Arena. And very quickly, from 1965, they go from having no teams in major professional sports to teams in all 4 major pro sports leagues in 1972. So it struck me as if you wanted to look at one city that symbolizes what has happened since then, that both shapes what happens and also reflects what happens, Atlanta seemed like the place to go. So I spent a decade working on Atlanta as a result of this, both writing my dissertation and then transforming it into a book.
And what did you learn in that decade studying Atlanta and the development of a professional sports landscape that may have made you think differently about why the South trailed the rest of the country in getting really what is our pastime in this country, that being professional sports?
I think that's primarily because they developed a unique sporting culture of their own. I think for a lot of Southerners, they didn't need major pro sports, whatever their background, whatever part of the South they were in, whether it was college football or golf or stock car racing or pro wrestling or minor league baseball. There were a range of attractions, both in a recreational sense and also in a spectator sense, that were very popular in the region before any team with Atlanta or any other city across its chest came to town. And there was a great deal of continuity of support of all those activities, even after the big leagues got to town. So I think in terms of trailing it, is they developed their own sporting culture in the absence of the major leagues, and it proved very tenacious and to this day has not dissipated, has only gotten stronger, particularly in the cases of college football and stock car racing, I would say, becoming more national pastimes and pursuits.
Well, I should turn it over then to a son of Atlanta.
Well, thank you so much, Clayton. I'm Robert Green II, an assistant professor of history at Claflin University, but I'm coming to you from Columbia, South Carolina. And very much as Kevin said, I'm originally from Georgia. And when I first heard of your book, Loserville, I had to read it because I am part of the second generation of fans for Atlanta sports teams that came of age in the 80s and 90s. And so while we were subjected to some pain and suffering, it wasn't to the same extent as the folks in the book that you're talking about. But I want to say before I ask my question that I want to thank you for writing such a detailed and fascinating book. There were a lot of things, even as both a historian, as a sports fan of Atlanta teams, that I learned from this book. So I want to thank you for writing it. But I want to get a bit more about that sporting culture idea, and how the South has a unique relationship to its own local sporting traditions. Now, one of the key themes of Loserville is the role of race in the development of sports in Atlanta. And I would like for you to talk a bit about how Black Atlantans in particular had a different relationship to those professional sports teams than, say, their white counterparts in the city.
I think particularly for Black Atlantans, pro sports became an imposition on their lives, particularly through urban renewal. You look at where the stadiums are built with Atlanta Fulton County Stadium and the Omni. Those were strong working class Black neighborhoods historically, in particularly Somerville, Summer Hill, and Vine City, among other places, really get destroyed as a result of the late 50s, quote unquote, slum clearance program, which was really clearing off land for use adjacent to downtown. I mean, 67,000 people get displaced by urban renewal in Atlanta, displaced from opportunities for jobs in downtown Atlanta, have to move somewhere else. Those houses are never rebuilt. The minute anybody shows any interest in moving pro sports to Atlanta, the Atlanta Housing Authority sells this land, which was designated for new housing. Buy housing. They're immediately selling it off to build a stadium. So it was a direct imposition on the lives of tens and thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of Black Atlantans, both longtime residents as well as the many newcomers to the city in the 50s and 60s. And in terms of the relationship to the stadiums, I would say particularly in the early years, African Americans in the surrounding neighborhoods were much more likely to have a relationship to the teams as employees than they, as working the low-paying jobs at the stadium, than they were as fans. As Atlanta's Black middle class develops, you start to see, particularly with the Hawks and a little bit later the Falcons, the development of a fairly large Black season ticket holding base for both teams. But if you had a particular relationship to the Braves, it's probably because you were an usher or had some other job at the stadium. And in some ways, I think it was a continuation of the confrontation that was happening in the region more generally in terms of race at the time period. It was just by other means through sports.
As you note in the book, Loserville, Atlanta really kicks off two generations of southern cities going out and really Sunbelt cities in general, not just the South, pursuing sports teams to kind of show a sense of, as you put in the book, being a major league city, which was a term that the folks in Atlanta often used for their own city in the 60s. And you point out in your book, you have this line that I love. You wrote, quote, "By putting professional sports in the service of lofty civic goals, elites in Atlanta and numerous other Sunbelt cities set themselves up for disappointments as grand as the enterprises they undertook on behalf of their communities," end quote. So talk a bit about how Southern cities in the last 50 years have really tried and worked hard to make these teams a key part of their identity, and whether or not that's been a good or bad or mixed bag for those cities.
Well, I'll start quickly and say I think it's been a mixed bag. There's certainly positive elements to it, too. I think the question of whether this is a reasonable way for cities to spend money, I hope is evident in the book that I have concerns about that. I think there's almost two generations with this. Atlanta, I think, was an outlier among the first generation of southern cities that got sports, pro sports, because I think in general, most of those cities were less focused on the teams and more focused on the venues as a showpiece of the city. Like if you look at the Superdome in New Orleans, I feel like building that was almost more significant than having a team. That you have this incredibly modern seeming thing. And you've got old New Orleans, but this gleaming stadium in the center of it. Houston, the Astrodome. There's such a fetishization of the idea of the building of the Astrodome. So I think among that first generation, the actual structure itself was the success almost as much as the team. I think in the second generation, people emulated Atlanta more, whether it was Charlotte, whether it was Jacksonville, Memphis, Nashville. I think they were more focused on getting a particular team to be an amenity, that demonstrated the city was worthy of major status.
And just to piggyback on what Robert asked you in your answer, so this is, if I'm thinking about this correctly, this is almost an invitation for the rest of the country to come to the South. So I think about all the incredible events that were at the Astrodome, right? I mean, we just celebrated Bobby Riggs versus Billie Jean King, which was the most viewed sporting event, I think, at the time. That was at the Astrodome. The NCAA game between Lou Alcindor and Elvin Hayes was at the Astrodome. And then all the events that you got in New Orleans with the building of the Superdome. So I'm just wondering, is this a use of sports inviting the rest of the world to see it?
I think yes, but I think it's almost the second step for these cities. The first step is being like, Atlanta, we're open for business. We don't have a lot of unions. The wages are low. It's a socially conservative place. Come on down. You can kind of run your company the way you want to run your company. We're not going to interfere. Bring some jobs. We'll spend some, spend some money here. And I think that mentality comes first for a lot of these southern cities before the stadiums do. The stadiums are just a manifestation of that sensibility. Come to the low wage, no union South attitude that a lot of them developed in the 50s and 60s and proved very successful at luring a lot of northern capital.
In your book, Loserville, you talk extensively about Ted Turner and his work with cable television. So could you talk a bit about how Ted Turner plays an important role in both A, Atlanta sports, and B, the nationalization of this Southern culture, or culture, so to speak, that you're talking about?
Like many broadly significant figures, I think Ted Turner is a bit of a chameleon. He seems completely Southern, but then completely like this cosmopolitan guy at the same time. I think Matthew McConaughey strikes me as a current guy who kind of has that quality too. He seems kind of like a hippie redneck at the same time. And I think Turner sort of had that thing in an earlier era. He was chewing tobacco. He went to the game without a shirt on. He's pushing peanuts down the line with his nose. Like he's trying to present as almost like, Jed Clampett or something, the way he presented himself. He's no Jed Clampett. He's an Ivy League educated guy. And he becomes the king of cable television, certainly. And TBS, starting out from Atlanta, beginning broadcasting the Braves primarily, then getting the Hawks. Turner owns both teams, saves pro sports for Atlanta. Atlanta may well have been down to just one team without Ted Turner. The Braves may well have moved to Toronto, may have moved to Seattle if it wasn't for him. The Hawks were certainly could have moved. We see the Flames did move. It could have been just down to Rankin Smith and his, kind of AAA football team with the Falcons in the 70s at one point. But Turner needed something just to show on his channel. You can't just show Andy of Mayberry in old movies all the time. So the Braves became a fixture as he pushes this station across the country and also is spreading Southern culture as a result of this. Not only with the Braves, but also there's the pro wrestling aspect of it with Georgia Championship Wrestling leading into WCW, the Braves, the Hawks, that people around the country embrace these Southern teams.
You're looking at Atlanta sports through the lens of history, but how do you see, with an influx on the one hand of immigrants to the South, and B, you see large numbers of Black Americans moving back to the South, you see a large number of affluent white Americans moving to the South as well. How do you think these different groups will change, if they will change, sporting culture in the South?
I mean, certainly the growth of soccer is something, it strikes me as being something that will continue. One thing that strikes me about Atlanta in particular, though, in spite of demographic changes, is Atlanta has become one of the smartest cities about dealing with these leagues in particular. The way they negotiated the Mercedes-Benz deal, Arthur Blank is paying the majority of the bill there, less than a lot of the cities. I mean, Atlanta certainly makes a contribution. It's a lot more money, but proportionally much lower percentage than they did back in the 60s when they did Fulton County Stadium. They also the city also got in place quotas for contractors to ensure more representative contractors for the building of the structure. Also, several churches were displaced as a result of it. They got significant money as a part of the deal to be able to rebuild their churches. So Atlanta is doing a much better pragmatic job negotiating on behalf of its citizens, I would say, in terms of these deals.
When you hear the phrase the New South, what does that mean to you? Especially in light of what you've written and discussed in terms of the importance of sport to the New South idea of the 60s and 70s. What does the New South mean to you?
I mean, I honestly, frankly, the first thing I think is it was Henry Grady, of course, just from taking all these history classes. But I think the same idea is in many respects out there. Just this idea of the South promoting itself into significance. I mean, Atlanta, of all places in particular, I think no city has been better at self-promoting itself into being a major city than Atlanta has. And that dates back to Grady, dates back to the 1920s with Ivan Allen's father, Ivan Allen Sr., who was a furniture salesman who ends up becoming basically the city's biggest civic booster for a quarter century. I think the leadership in that city has really kept its eyes on the idea of making itself a destination for capital for a very long time and has proven incredibly successful at it. So I think the sense of just going out there and trying to bring wealth to the region is a big aspect of the New South. I also think, to me, the notion of migration is a big aspect of it, too. Whether it's people coming from rural Georgia into Atlanta, whether it's northern transplants coming down for work because they're involved with big corporations, whether it's the great migration from the South in a broader sense. I mean, I think there's a lot of movement of people going on with the notion that the South is going to be something very different than its agrarian past.
You know, I really think this has been a really informative interview. And I will, of course, save the audience from my rants about the 1996 World Series, Super Bowl 51. But Clayton, again, I want to thank you so much for really contextualizing sports in Atlanta. This has been, I think, very helpful for our audience and goes a long way towards proving that everything has a history, even your favorite sports teams.
Well, thank you so much. This has been both a pleasure and an honor for me, and I'm so appreciative of the invitation and for the great conversation we had.
Well, thank you. This is great. You know, Robert, one of the things that struck me about this conversation was Omar George. And he kind of suggested that although his family's business has really done well and prospered in the South, there's still some trepidation that he picked up about how welcoming the South was to an immigrant business like his.
And I think Omar's point is very important when thinking about what the New South actually means to people who are not from the South. And as the region really welcomes more immigrants, welcomes Black Americans back home, so to speak, there's a lot more work to be done in terms of growing business and making business open and friendly to all. Funny enough, though, I think the one place where we're seeing the best of this, the best of business being open, best of the South being open for everyone, is actually in the world of sports. I can't tell you how many times I have, for example, gone to games here in Columbia, South Carolina, to root on the Gamecocks or watch the Falcons on television and so forth. And I found myself united with folks who I've otherwise never met before, might disagree with politically, but we're united because we're watching the same sporting event together.
And I think that's particularly important when you really talk about professional sports, because I will argue and have written before that you can't be a great American city without a professional sports team. And so we know that just in the last, in the early part of the last half of the last century is when professional sports finally began to step into the South. And Clayton talked about that brilliantly. So I think that's really an important point for people to understand is the importance of professional sports to the South.
Although with the way the Atlanta Hawks play defense, the term professional might be up for grabs.
I was trying to be nice.
I'm not.
You know what I'm saying? It's like we got a demo tape and nobody want to hear, but it's like this the South got something to say.
Our New South is brought to you by the Levine Museum of the New South in Charlotte, North Carolina, thanks to the generous support of the Knight Foundation. Our New South is produced by Next Chapter Podcast. It's written and produced by Byron Hunter. The editor and sound designer is Kyle Murdock. Executive producers are Jeremiah Tittle and Franky Abbott. Our technical producer is Brian Douglas.
with special thanks to Levine team members Alexander Piñeres, Karen Sutton, and Cliff Whitfield.
Please follow the show, subscribe, rate, and review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your podcast. Learn more at ncpodcast.com/Our New South and museumofthenewsouth.org.
The South got something to say.
Next Chapter Podcasts.